Hi, Eugene. Good morning from me.
Hey,
Happy Friday.
happy Friday. How's it going,
How are you
sir?
doing today? Doing pretty well. Yeah, it's nice and sunny here in Seattle, so can't really complain too much.
Yeah, I'm doing okay because we had a really bad storm like 3 days ago. So I wasn't sure if I was gonna have to relocate today. So we got power back after I think two or 3 days. 2 days, yeah. So that was a little nerve-wracking.
It's been some interesting worldwide things with power outages recently. I don't know the details, but just like random anecdotes. I know like Spain and Portugal and a few others had
I heard
like
about Spain, yeah.
it was
Yeah.
Spain and
There was some
Portugal both. Yeah,
oh, okay.
yeah. But it's like an entire countrywide power outage for like a 24 hours or 48 hours, something like that. Kind of nuts.
Yeah, there was a just uh near in the Pittsburgh area, there was 250,000 people without power for for a while. So
That's also a pretty good number. Yeah, it's usually
yeah.
you get like a few thousand in a neighborhood, but that's that's an entire county essentially at that number, I'd assume.
Yeah,
Almost,
yeah,
yeah.
pretty much. Yeah.
Well,
But other than that, doing well.
yeah, good.
Good.
Good to hear on that. And glad to get you on for this. As we were talking about a little bit, I think there's going to be some really practical use cases and applications for people to kind of hear both our conversational side of it, but also just I'm excited for this topic specifically today, just because we both exist in a similar universe of external consulting, and what are some thoughts and considerations that go into that. So.
Yeah. So I guess a question for you is like, how did you get end up getting into consulting? Was it intentional or
Yeah,
or
and
less so?
I just thinking about the stream. I'll answer that question second, but let's just give you briefly a chance to
Yeah,
introduce yourself to the channel and
sure.
everything. We'll start from there, and then we'll circle back to the consulting question.
No, that sounds good. Yeah.
Yep.
So for anyone who doesn't know who I am, which is probably a lot of people, my name is Eugene Meidinger. I've been, geez, I think I've been consulting for on Power BI for 8 years. I think I started like 2017, maybe, like when it was still kind of fresh. And I've been solo for about 6 years. So I've been working for myself, doing a mix of consulting and making courses for Pluralsight and now for myself. And it's definitely interesting. I think there's a lot of stuff that I kind of learned the hard way going along. I remember first year solo, I was just doing whatever I could to pay the bills. So you do stuff for your previous employer. I was doing Xamarin mobile development for my previous employer. So
Mhm.
completely unrelated, but I knew about their existing application and all this kind of stuff. And you take whatever work you can, and then as you start to get your footing underneath you, you learn to start raising your prices until someone says no. And I've always been really, really bad at this. If I didn't have
Yep.
friends in the community who were like, Eugene, you're making us look bad, raise your prices. I might still be charging like $125 an hour or something today. So it's
That was advice that Matt Allington gave me years back. Is like you don't know what your price is, just continue to raise your prices until basically until somebody questions it, and then drop it back down a little bit below that, and that just feels
yeah, yeah,
fine.
yeah. Well, I'm such a people pleaser. I hate doing it, but like you raise your prices and no one complains. You're like, oh, I guess this is the market value. But I think a big factor was SQL like 2023, I think around there, because Megan and I had both been on the same project, and she knew what she was charging through Denny Cherry and Associates, and she knew what I was charging, and I was doing like a lot more work. And she's like, what are you doing? You need to do better. Um, but yeah, there's stuff you don't think about. Like, um, one of the things that encouraged me to make this course is every week, like more recently, every week someone on Reddit would be like, how do I become a Power BI freelancer?
Mhm.
And they'd always have kind of the wrong mindset because you start out thinking, okay, well, I've got this skill set. I want to be able to monetize it somehow. And the truth is, like, the customer does not care. They need you to actually be able to solve their problems. And so you have to
Yeah.
understand what their problems are and all this kind of stuff. So it's really easy to come into this just from the wrong mindset.
And I mean,
Oh,
even just think it. Sir, go ahead.
oh, I think Josh Knox is reminding me to say I'm also a Microsoft MVP. That or he just likes shouting MVP. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, and this is your first or second year? Remind me.
Um, second or third. I've lost count because I was in and then I was out and then I'm back in. So I think this is my third year.
Okay, so yeah, like whatever I forget, I'm always like, okay, hold on, like one, two. I just count my chips.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
you typically get your first one at zero, so it's like count like you're like from birth you're
Yeah,
counting
yeah,
at one instead of from zero. The array starts at one, not zero. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
with that, but uh, I guess going back to your consulting question, how I got into it. Well, two things I'll mention is I'll answer that question, but going back to customers and clients, and basically with consulting, there's an issue sometimes with trying to like equate time and the cost, or the time and value and all that. And one of my favorite
Yeah.
analogies, and I'm hoping the story is true, but I think it was back with like Theodore Roosevelt or one of the early presidents, might have been Eisenhower. Like there was an issue with the boiler in the White House, and like they bring a plumber into it. He goes, basically looks, asks a couple questions, does a couple of like knocks, takes like maybe 3 minutes or something like that. Draws a little X, like, drill here, this gonna relieve the pressure. And like, it's like, how much? Oh, that's gonna be $500. Like, oh, that's absurd.
Yeah,
Why would you spend $500 like dollars in this? Well, it's uh, $1 to draw the X, $499 to know where to draw the X. With that,
yeah.
so like, yeah, go ahead.
I've heard that story in other forms, like with a car mechanic, like tapping a car and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. So I have a feeling it's apocryphal, but it's very true.
yeah. And like there's like graphic artists who do logos and stuff. Same thing. It's like the like, is it time thing or is it a value thing? If I can give you a perfect logo in 3 minutes, like, should you only pay me for 3 minutes of my time, or should you pay me the $5,000 it takes to know how to immediately know what to draw with some of those? And
Yeah.
I do think there's a fine line in some consulting between the two. Like, I still mostly do time and material, but project-based stuff sometimes on just basically the value of what's being delivered can also be done. But it's a tricky conversation to have. But digressions aside, to your question, how did I get into consulting? Honestly, it was a very natural path, and I'll try to keep it fairly simple. But my
Sure.
first job outside of getting a technical certification for database design was basically these. It was for a vendor. It was here in Redmond, and it was building like Power Pivot reports. So from day one, I was always a consultant, just working for other shops initially, and
Oh. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
well, yeah, that's been my entire career, is just consulting, whether for myself or other people. And at some point, I just, one person hired me full time as a 1099. We're like, well, crap, that takes a lot of extra taxes out of my, because I have to pay the employer side and the regular. Like, okay,
Yep, yep, yep.
what's a legal way to reduce that? Start an S corp. And
Yeah.
for configurations, okay, I have an S corp, I should probably have a website. So I built a basic. Today I still have the same skeleton website from Squarespace on whatever their earlier platform. The one that I have today is still built off of their old version because I have no need to redo it. But that from day one is just, it kept growing, and then I got a website, so that I had an email list. People slowly started to like randomly contact me, started doing side work, and like, oh, I kind of like this. Maybe I could just do this full time. And it just gradually progressed, where I did less and less contract work for others, more to myself. And I think one year I just realized, like, oh, I haven't actually reached out to any of my subcontract colleagues, because
Yeah.
I don't have enough time to do that anymore, because I have enough of my own clients. So it was never a leap, which a lot of people have to do. It was a very gradual, like, going into the deep end of the pool over multiple years. But that's how I slowly segued into consulting for me.
Yeah. No, everything in my career has been an accident. Um, because like the getting into business intelligence was an accident. Literally, I was dating this girl in college, and I had to pick an elective for IT. And of the choices, the business intelligence one worked better for her schedule. So I ended up
Nice.
taking that. Worked at Bayer Material Science for a year. Got fired. Wasn't really a good fit because I didn't understand the business side. But then I got hired by a local fire protection slash IT company. It was a family owned thing. Like the fire protection company bought the IT company and they sold both services. And because I could spell SQL, I was suddenly their DBA. I was their SSRS report monkey. And so I was doing all this internal stuff for a number of years. And then they had a merger. So they bought another IT company. And that was the salespeople went, oh, we've got a SQL consultant now. And I'm like, what? Um, and there's a question in the chat about whether it's more about mindset or skill set. But one of the really big things is it's about a lot of it's about relative expertise, and being able to solve the problem. And I learned this very strongly with that first job because I was so nervous. I downloaded all the scripts. I go in, I start running the scripts, I start learning the stuff, and I find out that their backups are completely mismanaged.
Okay.
So I don't know if you know much about SQL Server backups, but you've got full, diff, and transaction. So full is
Hmm.
everything. You should do that daily,
Yep.
once a week, whatever. Transaction is whatever's happened in the last X minutes. You need to do those regularly so the transaction log doesn't grow out of control. Well, they had about, I think they had a 30 gigabyte database, which isn't huge. They were doing a full backup every 30 minutes, which is not ideal.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So, and then they were doing a transaction log backup at night because if you don't do any transaction log backup, eventually you'll fill the disk. So I told them switch that around, and it was funny because the IT guy, well, he's like, well, it's really only interfering with things 16 times per day if you think about it. And I'm like, yeah, that's true, but
Only 16 times.
right,
Yeah.
because they were doing the full 8 hours, like every 30 minutes for the 8 hours of business hours, right? So really, there's only 16 times where they're backing up 30 gigabytes. But yeah, so had them switch that, turn on the checkbox for compression, and they got, I think it was like a 10x difference in size. I forget what it was, but it was enough that they could move to a different storage medium. And I looked like a genius, but really I was just like a couple steps ahead of the customer. And that's how I became a consultant.
Yeah. When you kind of see things that others don't, or to a degree, I feel like consultants definitely have an attention for detail because you need to in your role. Your job is to like find
Yeah.
every crack and offer, at least how to optimize or improve it.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a lot of it is just being like, okay, what you hear somebody tell you what they want, and a lot of it's just like, well, how could this go wrong? No, hold on, how can we validate this? And then I'm sure you've dealt with this, but with business intelligence, it's really rough because it's extremely iterative. Like the scope that the customer gives
Yeah.
you, like when you're initially trying to scope the project, is never what they end up actually wanting. And so you have to plan for scope creep, or I think you've talked before on like a chat about how like the data is never as clean as they think it is, or there's
Oh
always
God,
just
no.
like these
Yeah.
little surprises.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And coming as well, like, I mean, broadly speaking about consulting, but narrowing in the discussion to like the topic of the day, where would you like to get started on either discussing, consulting or segueing in at any point to kind of some of the new course of the learnings of wherever
Yeah.
you'd like to start?
Yeah. So how about we um I'll I'll talk a little bit about some of the intro and kind of the life cycle of consulting, and then I can show you some of the cool stuff they've done with
Uh,
ChatGPT and all of that.
let's do it.
Um, cool. So let me. All right. Um,
There you go.
cool. Yeah. So I find it kind of hilarious that a lot of like the first module, and there's some videos for it out on YouTube if people want to check it out, is me trying to tell people like maybe don't become a consultant, um, or at the very least think it through a little bit more, because I think a lot of people are just kind of heading for disaster because they have that wrong mindset. And so the analogy that I talk about is, if your car is broken and you're planning to go to Disneyland or some family vacation, you're really stressed, and you go to the mechanic and say, hey, can you fix it? Eh, If they reply like, well, I'm very enthusiastic, you would just, you'd flip your lid. Or if you say, hey, no, I need to know, do you have the skill set to fix it? And it's like, well, I'm a Nobel Prize winning botanist and I'll give you a good deal. And it's like, no, no.
Yeah.
And you know, that aside, like whenever, again, I answer these questions on Reddit, or I see these posts on the Power BI Reddit, and so many people kind of have this assumption of like, oh, well, I have a lot of enthusiasm, or I have these skills, or I'll do the work for free, or my work is not taking advantage of my skill set. And I think people just kind of have it all backwards. They kind of just figure, well, it's all about me, and customers do not care. You are a very fancy mechanic to them,
Uh-huh.
and you know they'll appreciate if you can solve the problem, but a lot of it is learning how to put the customer first. I think that's one of the biggest things, and I think that's hard for people. Um, and so that's kind of like the big mindset shift for a lot of people. In terms of the life cycle, let me pull. Give me 1 second. There we go. So I like the analogy of gardening or trying to grow something. And so you have this continual cycle where it starts with just planting these seeds. Everything you do with marketing is just, I don't know, it's kind of like planting a seed or buying a scratch off lottery ticket or whatever, and there's a chance it's going to turn into something. And the hard part, just like with, actual planting, is you have no idea what's going to grow. You can do stuff to make it more likely to turn into things.
Yep.
But unless you're doing like mechanized farming, you really don't have a lot of control over that. And so a lot of it is about figuring out, well, what's going to make the best environment that this could grow. And so on one extreme, you have cold outreach, where anytime someone that I've never met emails me, I just mark as spam and I block it. And I'm surprised at the number of emails I get kind of nagging on my website and telling me that I need to pay them to make it look better. They must get like 1 in 100,000 or something, and it's enough to justify the cost. But because people wonder, like, how do I get the work? And I'm not sure how it is for you, but I think the other end of that spectrum is referrals, the highest level kind of trust. And so there's a spectrum here where you have to find a way to get people to be able to trust that you know what you're doing, that you're worth working with. And so having some sort of social proof can help with that. Obviously, you've got
Yeah.
a website, you've got this YouTube series, people can watch you and say, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. For me, a lot of that's been presenting, user groups. I've gotten a little bit from like Pluralsight courses and that kind of stuff, but a lot of it comes from peers, from word of mouth. It's, there were definitely a bunch of times where Melissa Coates would get potential work, and she's like, well, I don't want to do this. And then she's like, hey, Eugene, do you want to do this work?
That's fair.
Yeah. And so I think anyone who's interested in consulting has to figure out, okay, how can I get my name out there, but also how can I build this trust? Because hiring someone is a big risk for a business. Like, you really don't know if that person's going to be able to solve your problem, if they're going to get stuck out in the weeds, any of that kind of stuff. And so I think starting out, this is one of the biggest things to figure out is how are you going to find people? And if you can specialize into a niche, whether that's Power BI for dentists or performance tuning or whatever, that makes your messaging and doing all that kind of stuff a lot easier.
I like Power BI for dentists. Like,
yeah. Well,
like I don't know about you. If you end up like, have there been any industries that you've accidentally become like an expert in? I've never attempted to it, but there are certain industries that either there's enough work out there that they've become like, where I've ended up doing like 10 projects in that specific industry or sub-industry, or it's, it's somehow happenstance. But there's a few where it's like, I'm surprised I've done that many reports for this type of data now 10 years into my career. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was, I don't think there's been any where like I've dived in deep enough, but there was at least a couple where there could have been a possibility. And one of them was I was subcontracting, and we did some reports for a print shop software. And so the whole idea was we were going to augment the reports with the Power BI stuff. They paid us to create the initial reports, and in theory, we would help with like install if people bought the add-on module, and then it
Yep.
could turn into customization, that kind of stuff. And the whole thing didn't quite work out the way that we'd hoped, but there's a huge benefit if you can understand the actual business stuff, because you can speak their language. If you're working with hospitals, then they're called patients, not customers. And so, yeah, having some way to communicate that is a big deal, and being able, because then you can start going to the trade shows, you can get your name out there, but also like you want to have word of mouth potential,
Yep.
because like I was talking to my friend Stephanie Bruno, who went solo recently. I was saying, you
Huh?
need people to be able to say, oh, Stephanie can do this, or Eugene can do this, because they specialize in X. And power reporting for dentists or reporting for healthcare or whatever is something where someone can say, oh, yes, I know the exact person for that. So I think it just requires a good bit of dedication. But if you already started in a specific industry, it's a perfect niche. It makes the marketing easier, the sales easier, and it just allows you to focus on what you're doing a lot more.
Well, I like how you've broken this down into a hierarchical level of quality, where it's the no amount of having to sell yourself versus a lot of having to sell yourself, and I think it breaks it down pretty well. Like I'm just repeat customers, referrals, word of mouth. Your it's a portfolio. Would that simply just be somebody kind of like finding it online, the one that's in
Yeah,
the
I mean,
middle?
to me, that's basically just most likely some reporting online. I know there's tools out there like Novi Pro, or you could easily set up something with GitHub Pages. But I think part of the challenge is, like, I see a lot of people who are kind of trying to hop at whatever work they can find, like, oh yeah, I can do Power BI. It's like, well, how do I know you're even above like the baseline level of competency? And
True.
so having something out there can really help with that. I think another thing too is it's really with a single image, unless you're like NJ, Power BI Park, um,
Yeah.
it's really hard to show with a single image like what you can do with Power BI. And it's really hard to show a lot of the value when you can't show the interactivity. So having some way to show, like, look, at a bare minimum, I've been able to take this data and put it in the shape and display it and have this interactivity. Just something where, like, if I'm a hiring manager or somebody, I can go and look and be like, okay, I know that they're this level of competent.
Yep.
Because there's a lot of people where they don't even have that base level. Or it's funny, related to that, I have a weird mixed relationship with certifications. I've I've aside from like subcontracting, where they've like the end customers asked for my resume and that stuff. I've never had a real customer ask me about a certification. They've never cared, because when you're doing consulting, you're so high on the trust level that it's just silly, right? Like, you don't go to your surgeon and be like, oh, but what were your grades in college, right? But
But
I
that
think
that
if
has
you're,
the assumption that you have been to college, right? And the like,
yes,
yeah. So I will say that like something that can speak to your credentials. So and like
yes,
that can be, because a lot of them don't have to ask for that, but I would argue that it's not that they're ignoring it. They've already probably seen or come across it, either listed in your LinkedIn, it was shown on your website, some type of credential that shows that you have skills, if they're reaching out to
yes,
you,
right.
has already been
I,
vetted by them with that. So like you have a case study, you have your client list shown of like, oh, I've worked with these companies, I have the cert, or you have your MVP, but all of those at least say you're knowledgeable, even if they don't directly ask you out loud.
right, exactly. I think you want, and so what I was kind of getting at is, like, certs can be a good way to have that social proof when you're just starting out. So social proof is the idea that, a lot of ways that we validate something is worth buying or somebody's knowledgeable is we look at how other people are treating them or how they're engaged or whatever. And so whenever you're further up this hierarchy of trust, you have less and less that you have to prove a lot of the time. But when you're just getting started with this, having a portfolio, being certified, any kind of testimonials or anything on your page, like you said, case studies is huge. So I think in that middle area is just getting away from being like a hands for hire and just a piece of meat on a block kind of thing, and having some way to show people that maybe don't know you quite yet that
Yep.
I'm actually able to do this work, whatever the shape may be.
It just anything that can speak for you, essentially, and I'd almost like the portfolio. In my universe, I'd paraphrase that to say like it's online presence in a way, right?
Right, your personal
Yeah,
brand of some sort. Yeah.
of anything, yeah, and that could be as simple as like a blog, a YouTube video, case studies, previous clients you've worked with, certifications. Every one of
Yeah.
those that shows your skills off in a that's been essentially written down on paper. There was actually a really good question from
Go go for it.
Ulysses. Might be mispronouncing that, so apologize if I got your name wrong, but or Olasai, maybe. But do I need a video presentation to explain the process of a project? Does this make things better or worse? Does it help in any way?
A video presentation for the process of a project. So I'm looking at the question. I assume that's sort of like how you as a individual handles a project. Like,
It would
oh,
essentially is like rather than writing up the case study, you'd have a video explaining the case study. Would be the way I interpret that. Is in you're taking what's
oh,
written. You're just recording it. But like, is it is it needed to have a recording? Does it help sell it better and make it more professional, or can you just simply have documentation on it?
yeah. I mean, to me, this is my personal opinion, obviously, but I don't think a video is necessary. I think the reason you would use a video is if there's some aspect of the development or the reporting or whatever that's very hard to convey over text. Like
Yeah.
maybe there was some sort of like you have a bunch of these where you show off some cool trick you did with a visualization or something like that. That would be
Yep.
really hard to do in a blog sort of thing. But if I'm, changing hats, if I'm looking to hire a consultant or something like that, what I care about is I want to know that not only does the person have the expertise, but they're able to manage the project, that there's going to be some predictability, because the biggest threat to any BI project is scope creep. And if you're charging
Yeah.
hourly, which a lot of people do, the risk is being put on the consumer. And so the
Hmm.
thing I care about the most is knowing that you're going to be able to solve it, you're going to be able to solve it reliably. As you get better and more confident in your skills, you can start doing flat rate or project milestones or that kind of stuff. But like you've talked about before, like it's this archaeological dig and you never know what you're going to find. It might be some gems, it might be some snakes. And so a lot of times if I am doing a big flat rate project, I'll have a scoping project before that or something like that. Um, there, there's also a question of how important is it to have good hair? Reed, you might have a better answer for this. My hair always looks awful. And some days I regret having a 4K camera because it's clear I probably should have combed my hair more.
Yeah, I mean it's it's a good day when you have a good hair day, but I thought the question was kind of funny. I
Yeah.
It's less about the hair; it's about the confidence. If you're confident in whatever you have, that's the important part, and also with skills. You know,
Yeah, there's a the whole confidence thing with consulting is very, very weird because you never want to, if you don't, if someone's like, hey, how do I do this? If you just bluster your way through it, you can probably BS your way for a while, but the moment the customer finds out that you've been BSing them, lying to them, making stuff up, you're gone. You're out of there forever, right? And so you want to be able to say, I don't know. But
of
if you
course.
just only respond, I don't know, you're a bad consultant. And so
You
you
mean
want to
no,
be able
no?
to say, but I can
It
find out.
depends. You got to
It
respond all the time,
depends.
but it
Yeah.
depends. Yes. That's the one that we say, we don't say I don't know, we say it depends. That's our way of saying I don't know. Or
Yeah,
better said
right,
is I
right,
don't have
right.
enough information, but yeah.
But like, I mean, I joke to people, a third of my rate is because I have such a broad professional network, and I can like DM you and be like, hey Reed, how do I do this or whatever, and then
Yeah.
people ask me the same sort of thing. So yeah, I think I think confidence is important, and the ability to balance confident that you can get the problem solved without just being arrogant or full of bluster or anything like that.
I would agree. But I would also dissect that just a little bit further. Just to say to me, confidence is something that is justified, valid, comes from a place of actual experience. The other two types of confidence is overconfidence and false confidence. You don't want either of
Yeah, yeah,
those necessarily. Like maybe a little bit of extra, like maybe you're good, but you need to be like, you want to present yourself at being 70%, not 60. So like there's a
yeah,
teeny tiny bit of just, you need to be slightly higher than your own personal perception, because it relaxes and makes the customer comfortable, but obviously like not to the point of you refuse to ever say you don't know, or like let me get back to you, because then
yeah.
you brew distrust, just to paraphrase what you were saying.
Well, and it goes back to what you're talking about, like the branding and producing content, because the best way to build that confidence is through practice and through having to find those answers. And in my experience, um, like that can be blogging or videos or whatever, but when you present, I've found that if you can get comfortable presenting in front of 70 people, then doing it in front of two people who happen to be a customer becomes much, much easier. And so
True.
the biggest thing that helped me with the confidence stuff to a certain degree was presenting and all those sorts of things.
Chris says hello from the chat as
Hey,
well.
Chris.
All right. What's next on the topic
Yeah.
agenda?
Yeah. So once you've done this kind of marketing piece, then the next part is sales. And sales is, okay, you've planted the seeds, you've hopefully planted them in the soil that it can actually grow in. And how do you help that turn into something? And so a lot of sales, honestly, is communicating your offerings, understanding their problem, then finding a middle ground. And I think a thing that people are hesitant to do when they're new or they're unconfident is sometimes you want to turn down work. um, there's been plenty of projects I've taken on or have been offered that just are not a good fit for me. Someone reached out to me this week about doing Apache Spark training because I did like one course on Pluralsight, and it's not worth doing. And so you have to make sure that your skill set fits or it fits with what you're trying to focus on, because especially if you make a hard leap starting out, you can be really desperate to just take on anything. Like the image here, this one's AI generated, but I would always look at the seed catalogs with my grandma, and they would have these fruit trees that were grafted, so they have 5 different fruits, and I always wanted one as a little kid. But Pennsylvania is not a great place to be growing fruit or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and so the sales process, if you're a bigger organization, it can be very extensive, but something small like a solo, it's just, there's usually an intro meeting saying like, hey, am I a good fit? What do you need what do you need done for the actual work? Trying to suss out, maybe there's some hidden assumptions that they just, think is easy or didn't think about, like, well, what's involved with getting access data, whatever. Figuring out pricing and how they're going to pay you. I think if you don't have any experience with consulting, you may not realize that the default is people get to wait 30 days to pay you. And so if you're
Fair.
living paycheck to paycheck, just wait until the payment terms are net 30 days or net 60 days. Like it gets pretty rough sometimes. And then finally the contracting piece, and just making sure the contract is fair for everyone, but watching out for those little surprises and all that kind of stuff.
So curiously
So
on
that's
the
kind of,
there, I'm pretty good at kind of like sussing out these days when when somebody's very like particular about details and budget. And like, granted, I understand that like there are some companies where like every 15 or 30 minutes is like, yeah, it's expensive for them to do some stuff just because they don't have a lot of cash versus like an enterprise client that can like sign like checks for you every month on
Yeah.
basically unlimited hours. But like there's definitely some projects where it's the like you need to have a 15-minute call to explain a 30-minute feature, and then they're like, oh no, yeah, that's too expensive, I don't want that 30-minute feature, because like 30 minutes is too much time. And like, again, I get that does happen sometimes, but I do try to avoid some of those projects where every single request you have to spend at least 5 minutes explaining what that is on an email to get a yay or nay, and then you end up just spending a lot of time.
Yeah.
You burn through a lot of unpaid time trying to explain what costs money and doesn't for stuff versus them just kind of trusting you. And what I personally have found is I set a threshold in the contract. You give me requests. I will do every request that you ask, with the expectation that each single request that comes through will be 4 hours or less at the most, or whatever that threshold is. Maybe it's an hour,
Okay,
but
sure,
like,
sure. Yeah.
there's a maximum threshold. And if I don't see anything, you know that whatever you've asked me is going to be at that peak or below. And if it's more than that, I'll say, hey, by the way, that's like a 7-hour thing. Do you still want that? I will double check. That's the way I've found, one, to balance and mitigate those emails, and two, to help, if I start to sign a contract and I have somebody say 15 minutes, that's a little bit of like a yellow flag type of a thing, because there's just going to be a lot of email hell, which again, it's, I don't fault some companies for having that, but it hurts as a consultant if you have too many of those projects. So I don't know, do you have anything when it comes to like, one, I guess, mitigating those types of conversations, or also just kind of looking for those and maybe avoiding ones where it's going to be a struggle to like get anything done for requests?
Yeah. I mean, thankfully, a lot of my customers tend to be small and medium businesses. And so a lot of times, we're able to do a rough estimate of the hours and get a lot of the general scope kind of figured out at the beginning, especially because a lot of times if someone's looking for me, they want help getting a project off the ground, like their first report or something like that. Like I have one potential customer right now where they want to do they want to imitate kind of like a fintech kind of dashboard or something like that. And so had like an initial meeting to give them a sense of like, is Power BI a good fit or whatever. They're going to go do some work with shaping up the data. And then presumably once they've gotten some more dev stuff done on their side, then we'll figure out like the overall kind of scope. So thankfully, I tend to avoid the like death by 1,000 cuts kind of situation. But what becomes more important then is all the upfront scoping. Just having a good sense of, okay, how long is this going to take? But especially to upfront communicating, okay, here's the oh, thanks Chris for the boost. But just upfront having the conversation of like, okay, here's some things that are going to be maybe a bit of a quagmire, like we're migrating the logic from Excel, or just what's not included in the scope. The worst I've ever been involved with was I was subcontracting and I wasn't involved with the initial scope. And so what the prime contractor heard when the scope got put together was, we're doing a proof of concept from some Excel reporting to Power BI. And what the customer heard was, we are doing a production ready lift and shift. And what I was given was an Excel report that had like nested 3 layers deep of Excel formulas and no documentation. So I'm literally going into formulas, seeing what page it points to, going to that page and trying to reverse engineer this stuff. Where if I had been involved on the initial scoping, I would have like put in certain assumptions or made things clear, because it's so much better to have a customer change their mind or walk away before you sign that contract than have to have it later. You still get surprises, but a lot of the art then is figuring out, okay, what stuff am I willing to eat in terms of hours, and what stuff can we push off and say phase 2? And how can we get the customer to be okay, like turning this into a change order or follow-up work or something like that? So that tends to be the biggest thing for me. It's just the initial scope control.
And as you said, it's very, very easy for that to start to crawl its way up. And at least just to comment a little bit on two things that I've found that is helpful for that is just explicitly writing in the contract to let people know that one, like we're going to lock in the requirements. Like this is the budget. We're going, before anything gets started, we're going to essentially sit in the scope of everything that's into there, and any
Yeah.
requests or changes, like we either have to drop something from this list, because we
Right.
only like so much glasses in the water, so to speak. Like it has to be distributed somehow. Or if I uncover something, I'm going to let you know, like, oh yeah, your data quality is crap. And none of us knew that, and you didn't know that it wasn't. So like extra time now has to be spent on that. So what we can do is you can A, increase the budget, or B, again, something needs to go onto the chopping block. But like all of that's kind of written in is like the two mitigating factors on adjustments. Either we uncover something or a request change, and both of them are fine. But I at least make sure it's explicitly written down for that.
I think that's valuable. And the thing is, if you have good management on this ahead of time, you'd be surprised how flexible the customers can be, because there's been plenty of times where I've had a project and been like, hey, this is taking longer than we think, or we're gonna have to make adjustments. And there's been times where like, all right, we're gonna move that to be something internal. We'll figure out how to handle, like, we want the bar chart to be purple. Okay, we'll handle that internally or something like that. But yeah, you just want to figure out ahead of time, because especially with the scoping and then the contracting, because that example I talked about with that mismatch, well, I had scoped that at 30 hours. It ended up being 60,
Yeah.
which means that both me and the prime contractor lost our shirt over that. I ended up doing a bunch of free work. Like I still got paid for a lot of it, but it's just a nightmare.
And it just does like one other mention on just time having to spend for some of those. Like I think another red flag, maybe not a red. There's a lot of yellow flags when it comes to clients. And again, like you're working in consulting, I'm sure you come across a lot of people
Yeah.
who are hiring a contractor for the first time. It's
Yeah.
where it's they're used to having employees in that, and like you give them the I don't say that ballparks are usually 40 to 60 for a standard report, like a typical 3 to 4 page report, but that includes like scoping, modeling, data sourcing, measures, metrics, and then feedback and conversations, all that, like 40 to 60 on average for those, unless it is super simple. And then, if there's a bit of like, oh, it takes that, like, that's a little over a week of like an employee's work. Like, yeah, I've spent 30 minutes on a call to explain a single measure to a client, and then they realize they want something else. That's half an hour of that time right there for one calculation. Yes, it can take a lot of time. And sometimes once you explain it, like, and you break it down, it makes sense. But I'm usually trying to be upfront to, like, even before I scope this out, I don't need to write this up, but you need to expect that it'll probably be somewhere in that range. And if that's already too high for you, without like trying to explain it further, then you might not be ready to take on like a project like that.
Yeah, because
from a
there's
cost perspective,
just all those little surprises, for sure.
There was a question again that I wanted to bring up from the chat. So let me, where is he here? So sometimes with Power BI, it always feels like the learning never stops. Feeling of kind of like not good enough can get in. For you, Eugene, how would you overcome this? And like, would you overcome it, or just roll up your sleeve and get your hands dirty?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways to address it. My cheat that I can't really recommend is I have a 5 links a week newsletter, and so that forces me to keep up on top of stuff. But no, I mean, I think I've written a blog post about like overcoming imposter syndrome, and I think embracing just-in-time learning is a big one. But then also that making content teaches you a certain amount of resilience.
Yep.
And so I think you accept that a lot of it is about relative expertise. You accept that there's stuff you're just not going to know. Like today, I was looking at the PL300, and there's a couple features I didn't even know existed for Power BI, which is embarrassing because I was giving live training to people the past 2 weeks. But I do think if you have kind of this concern, I would try and get the PL300, because if you can't pass the PL300, that shows that maybe there's some gaps that you should work on first. But after that, a lot of it is just your ability to learn just in time, to solve problems just in time, and your resourcefulness. And so you're never going to feel completely on top of it.
I'm just responding to some of the chats as well. But
Yeah.
I do I think that there, to what you said a little bit, in there's always a chance to continue to learn. That will never go away, and you should. But uh, don't let that, I guess, hold you back from your own competency to a degree. Because like I'm still learning all the
Yeah.
time. Like, there's a lot more in the Microsoft stack that I don't know that I do. I have my own specialties, but like in terms of the breadth of expert level of like even within the BI platform these days of Microsoft, there
Yeah.
is still more that I don't know that I do on some stuff. Like it's a broad ecosystem of tools, and do the ones that will be relevant to you, your job, or slightly adjacent to it, but you're not going to be a jack of all trades because then you're a master of none.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I totally agree. Let's see what else we had here. So, sorry, 1 second. PowerPoint's being weird. There we go. So you've done your sales, and then you actually have to fulfill. And so fulfillment is that fruit kind of ripening. And so with the fulfillment, we already talked about requirements gathering, making sure that you have a proper sense. At a certain point, you have to deliver. But then we talked about a lot of it. You manage the scope creep and you figure out, okay, what's an acceptable change and what's something that needs to be carved off and put into phase 2, and how can we turn that change order a new project? And you work with a point of contact to accept whatever you're doing, and then hopefully eventually you get final sign off. And depending on the duration, if it's a tiny project, then you invoice them at the end and get paid for it. But most likely that 40, 60 hour project, you probably have broken up into milestones. So you're getting paid along the way, because the default is net 30, which means you send them an invoice and they still have 30 days to pay. It's not like Amazon where people are paying up front. And so there's a lot of soft skills and emotional intelligence involved with this, and not just the technical delivery.
The manager rock question, right? The manager comes to you, I need a rock by Friday. You bring him a rock. It's like, well, not that rock, another rock. You bring him another rock. Well, like, no, not that rock. And
Yeah.
unless you like, well, unless you dig into what kind of rock, or honestly, like, well, it's not actually a rock. You're looking for more of like a pebble, or there's some other questions behind it. It's like, what question do you have that this rock is trying to answer? Oh, you didn't need a rock. You actually need an orange. It's circular, but no, it's a completely different thing. So like that's what I usually try to break it down, is I strip away everything other than what answers do you need? I'll find the data that'll help you get that, which might be vastly different from what they thought to answer that question.
Yeah. And so sometimes during the initial scoping or early on the project, you need to maybe job shadow them a little bit and be like, show me how you do this today, or show me the report you have today, and all that kind of stuff. But you have to, it becomes really weird as a consultant, because in my mind, you're kind of like speed running, building a sense of rapport and connection, understanding with your customer, because you're always getting dropped into these environments and you don't know how the business works or what they do or what they really need. And you just kind of have to have this like loving distrust of all your customers, in the sense like, okay, I know you're telling me you want faster horses, but I think you want the Model T. I think you want a car.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
tell me why. I know you said you want this, but I don't trust you. Tell me why you actually need that.
I want real-time data.
Oh my God. Real-time data.
It's so triggering for anybody who does consulting. Well, because this could easily be a 20-minute conversation, but it's
sure.
In one sentence, real time for most people is near real time.
Near real time.
All you need is enough refreshes a day most of the time to get the data in at, like, I mean, if you have premium or anything above, just every 30 minutes. There you go.
Just do it every 30 minutes. Yeah.
Current data. Yeah.
Or if you really need something, do direct query and make sure you're using some of the other features and get it within like 15 minutes or something like that. But yeah,
hybrid tables.
That's a perfect example.
Yep.
Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And then once you've fulfilled the work, the last kind of thing is, ideally that fruit bears more seeds and turns into more work. And so the best marketing is a happy customer. And I think part of the whole sales and marketing thing that's hard for like introverts and people pleasers like me is being willing to ask for small favors. Like, hey, you were so happy with that project. Can can I get a referral? Can I get a testimonial? Can we turn this into a case study? And that can be hard to ask for, but ideally, like, you have such a high standard of quality that your customers should all be excited to put their logo on your site or provide a testimony or something. And if you're not getting to that level of quality and customer satisfaction, that's worth thinking about and figuring out why.
What fruit is that, out of curiosity? I was
I
thinking
don't. It
it's
says
not a
dragon
pomegranate.
fruit in the URL.
Dragon fruit.
It says sliced
Okay,
dragon
that
fruit.
makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Because like the seeds are really small, like little chia seeds in there. Everything's fruit analogy. Yeah, bring in the avocados as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the life cycle that I wanted to cover.
One last question that I just wanted to. I like this one from Chris. Where? Oh man, it already went back to the second page. No, here it is.
Oh no.
Well, because I have my feed where I grab my question. Here it is. What is the wildest request you've ever received from a client?
The wildest request.
I think it could be two ways. An actual request that, like, not knowing the data and how stupid of a request that could be, or complex, better said. I could either think of it as an actual weird request, or just like something where that's going to take like 10,000 hours to build because it's such a convoluted thing I'd have to make to make it. I think of it could be either one of those.
Yeah. So I know one that sticks out in my mind, and it's only wild if you know what Power BI was like in like 2018.
Okay.
But I had this one customer who was obsessed with Stephen Few and his book Information Dashboard Design. I ended up reading the book and learning a lot from it because of that. And he wanted sparklines like everywhere. And this was like 2018. Sparklines were not a feature. And so the options at the time was either some Power KPI table visual. We tried doing that. It just chugged. It was not meant for that, because if it was like 6, it would have been fine. But this was like 30 different rows. And the other alternative was like all these weird DAX and SVG image hacks that people were doing. And so that was a really tough conversation. Be like, no, this isn't gonna, just because this person talks about data ink ratio and you want to do this way, Power BI is not a mature enough product to do that. Like, now we have native sparklines, but at the time that was a challenging conversation.
It's one of those where a lot of people just don't realize, like, because from a business requirement perspective, like, hey, this system does this, I would like that, can you do it here? And they don't understand sometimes translations. I would compare mine to I had a client that had a .NET report they previously had, or most of theirs was built .NET. And like, if you know how to code, there's a ton of bells and whistles and like web-like elements and all the sorts of stuff that you can do in there. And they wanted a Power BI report like that. So they wanted one that had a bunch of like built-in tabs at the top that had little drop downs that would change the menus, but then those menus had sub-menu buttons that would click. And I ended up on one page, like, I built a really cool report that would have menus, sub-menus, pop-ups and all this, but it took like 25 to 30 bookmarks on a single page to make everything, because so many of them would have to conditionally understand. So this submenu was at the active or inactive state, and that would open this one. But if you closed it, it would have to make sure to go back to the right one.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the exact example of the like technical debt, where I'm very clear to the client, nobody but me will ever again be able to like update this but me. Is this okay? It's like, yes, we want this exactly to specs. Like, all right, it's just going to be the most Rube Goldberg, House of Cards thing ever. And like, please don't ask me in 2 years to change something on this page, because it's going to be a nightmare. But that's a request that I got, and that was just, it took so many hours to build, and like, I'm getting paid by the hour, but it's still just, I did not enjoy building it. It was painful.
Yeah. Anytime they want something to be like an app that does, you've unlocked a core memory of mine. So this isn't Power BI. This was Excel. No, this was Access and Power Pivot. But I spent 100 hours on a customer project at my last job where they wanted a resource planning tool. So they made titanium in the United States, and they want to be able to predict, okay, we have this much demand projected in the future. So how much like raw ingots, how much raw material do we need? But they didn't want IT involved at all. So we couldn't have a SQL database. We couldn't have any IT dependencies. So I built a resource planning, like forecasting tool in MS Access. And so literally it would just go through each week in the year, see how much demand there was predicted, plan an order, and then keep going through. And then the report was Excel and Power Pivot, but I didn't know how to write DAX. So instead of related, I was using lookup value, and I had calculated columns everywhere, and I was
Yep.
just summing on them. So somewhere before Chris Wagner even knew about Power BI, he felt a pain in his chest as I developed this tool.
I mean, I think that's the way a lot of people learn. And I remember
Yeah.
10 years ago, there used to be that little card that Rob Colley gave out with his training that was like a cheat sheet of things to do in Excel. And I do remember one of those where like, you're going to think you need a calculated column. 99% of the time, it could probably be a measure. But like,
Yeah.
because we see the data as we build it, it's so easy to kind of like stay step 1, step 2, step 3 with calc columns. So you end up with these tons of them that you sum before you realize, oh, everything can be done inside of a measure. But I was
Yeah.
the same way. If I go back to some of my early reports, I look at them now that were built in Power Pivot, I would be horrified by the skill that I had back then. It worked and the numbers were right, but the modeling was crap.
Yeah. Yeah. And I ended up supporting that for like 5 or 6 years. Even after I quit my last job, like 1 or 2 years after that, I was still supporting that thing.
I'm excited to see this little demo that we have here now
Yeah.
too. Like
So let's go ahead and
yes.
one of the cool things is I wanted to do some experimental stuff with the course. And so one of the things is I made a custom GPT. And so I actually, even for people who don't know how to what to ask a customer or any of that kind of stuff, I even made a document for, okay, what kind of stuff do we want to get an answer to? So for example, let me close that. So I made a pretend customer. I gave it a system prompt, document, some general stuff, and we can say like, hey, why do you want to migrate this report? And so, I put in little details like Microsoft charging $450 an hour for SSRS and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, and so you can be like, are there any red flags I should know about?
Right. Okay, cool. Just making sure the video's not cutting
It's
off
weird
text.
that
We're good.
it's weird to me that GPT's been adding a bunch of emojis to everything. But
yeah, I do wonder because I ask it to add it when it's a LinkedIn post because it just helps to like
yeah.
break up the attention. But I do wonder if it's overgeneralized it because people have asked it enough for like for social media posts because you want them just to add flair.
Yeah. Well, they had to roll back a recent change because it was too much of a sycophant or whatever.
Oh
But
yeah, and it
here
was
we
like
can
too
see,
sassy. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. But here we can see, oh wait, we've got our sales quote on a CSV file. And it's like, oh, oh, can we move the CSV file to SQL? And so, but you can, interact with them and be like, I estimate this will take 60 hours. So come on, go in. There we go. It's funny because it sometimes gets a little bit confused. So here it's trying to be a little bit too helpful, but it's still a nice way to practice. And it was fun to build because the way that it works is, so you give it a set of instructions with some little details. Shorter is better. You can give it some starter questions, and then I gave it an Excel source query. So a SQL query that's allegedly driving the Excel file that we need to migrate and all that kind of stuff. And so I had at least 1 or 2 people who really appreciated and were happy about that. And then I also made one for contract negotiation, same sort of thing. And I gave it a really malicious kind of contract. So I asked it, hey, I want you to make a contract with all of these just negative things in here. Just try and make the worst contract possible for the consultant, because you don't want to have to figure out how to read this stuff live. And you can always hire a lawyer, but lawyers are expensive. And so I had it produce something, and then I've got a little custom GPT for being able to talk to it. But then I also made a little document where I went through and I marked up everything that, like, if I did a first pass, what would I be concerned about, all that kind of stuff. So
Yep.
I'm just excited about this stuff because I think it's a way to add a way to get some low stakes practice, low stakes kind of hands-on kind of stuff, because so much of stuff is soft skills. It's hard to feel like you have a sense of it, you know?
Well, and just to, like, this is the exact thing that I use it for. Like, at this point now, I have the Windows just GPT app installed because it's just always open, and constantly honestly, I screenshot the crap out of so many things and just hand it to it, ask it to extract text, to turn this through a table, do this, summarize this, help me with this. But for contracts, because I have to sign these all the time with clients, and they hand you a 45-page NDA, and like, all right, this is going to take me 30 minutes to read through. Feed it to it. What's wrong with it? Is there anything that I should, like, probably have a discussion on? It's so good for summarizing and helping find yellow and red flags for you. I love it.
Right, because usually it's either little stuff or it's like giant red flags. Like, it's been rare. I mean, if you have, I talk about this in the course, if you have your own standard contract, that makes everything easier because you don't need to review it because you've made it. But it's been rare that I've had to modify a contract lately. Usually it's small stuff like, hey, if you need it more than net 30, I charge an extra 10%, because and sometimes I'm like, let's just adjust that down. Or, hey, we've got a termination clause, but it's asymmetrical or whatnot. But I remember, my last job, I quit, and then I was doing some independent work for them, and the contract they sent me looked very similar to an employee contract. And so it had a non-compete in there, and the non-compete was worse than the one I initially signed when I was working for them. Because the one I initially signed was a 1 year, and I think it was like 50-mile radius or something like that. And the contractor contract was a 2-year non-compete in a 50-mile radius. And that I got a lawyer for, because there was all these things I'm like, no. But if you've never had to review this stuff, like, how do you know? I mean, I'm not a lawyer. ChatGPT is not a lawyer, so definitely still get a lawyer for this stuff. But being able to learn how to read some of the stuff is helpful.
And the other thing that I would actually say that this has helped me on too is it's hard to know how estimating can be challenging because there's so many bugs, rocks, and things to uncover. I've had a continuously evolving list of, like, requirements docs to give over to it, but I've taken multiple things that I've had as templates, checklists, and other stuff. I give it to GPT, do the deep research button, and ask it, like, help me find gaps in anything else I should be asking my clients or doing on that. So
nice.
Just modifying existing stuff's really useful.
Yeah. And so, this doc I had up before, but just like a list of things, like, I mean, you could honestly take this and just use it with your regular customers. Like, okay, what stuff do I need to know? But over time, you get a sense of, like, what kind of red flags to keep an eye out for and all that kind of stuff.
Just reading the document, or?
Yeah. All right. Do you want to answer some other questions or what?
Yeah. Well, and then we have, if there was anything else you wanted to show in this, I usually have like 10 or, like 15 minutes or so of overage. It doesn't have to have a hard stop, but let me just double check that there's anything.
I think that's all the main stuff.
Okay.
And then I don't know if we want to mention, we've got a discount code and stuff in the description.
Yeah, so if you want to go ahead and mention that, and then I'll check for any
so we
questions.
so if you check out training.sqlgene.com, I've got my course on Power BI consulting. And right now, if you use code LIVE, so LIVE, for the next week, then you can get 66% off and get the course for $100 instead of $300.
Nice. Okay.
So
So
yeah,
yeah, definitely hop on that, and it'll be available for the next 7 days, and then I'll take it down.
yep,
Figure not leave it up. Just tell people, oh, sorry, you missed out on this.
yeah, my
Darn.
bad, yeah, all that stuff.
Exactly. But yeah, in general, the you know, few people out there that I would say can help educate as well as Eugene. So I definitely recommend checking this out and giving the course a look. And yeah, especially at that discount rate, it seems like it'll be worth the price for sure.
Yeah,
I think
I mean, and you've got
go ahead.
14 days to ask for a refund with Teachable. So worst case, buy it, binge it, and then return it. I won't be offended.
Exactly. See, yeah, I don't think nothing else immediately at the top, and then I'm just asking anybody else if there was any remaining questions. Drop them into the chat once more at the bottom. But I'll probably go ahead and flip back to this guy.
Yep.
There we go. Excellent.
Cool.
Fun, lively discussion. This has been fantastic, for sure, with some of this. And you know, I enjoy when I just get there's a little bit of almost like you get to hang out, but people still get to learn stuff. But yeah, the more I've done these, I think that I've really found that people love the water cooler discussions where,
Yeah,
you know, and between like podcasts or anything else, it's just there's a lot of valued learning and just in that conversational back and forth and chit chat.
yeah. Well, and like when I went independent, I started blogging every year about my journey because like I think a lot of people are curious about how the other side kind of lives. And it's got ups and downs for sure. I think if I was purely in it for the money, I should have stuck with a W-2 job because you have to pay your own insurance, all that stuff. But the flexibility is very nice. Like if my mom has a fake emergency and she's out of orange juice and she needs me to run over, I can go bring some orange juice or something like that. And so I appreciate the flexibility this kind of brings.
And I just speaking of that, and like there is like entire sessions that I've actually pitched to conferences. I haven't presented it yet, but one of my new ones this year is creating a brand presence, but one of those is
Oh, nice.
blogging. And the thing that I encourage people to do, I think, is the write down everything like that comes across as a thought, because the best way I can think of it is it's almost like a sales funnel. You know, you're going to get 20 customers that become 10 leads, 5 prospects to one client. Like that's the
Yep.
same with ideas for blogging. So every time I have, like, if I'm working on something and if there's a moment where I get stuck to try to think about how to do this, then, oh, I guess if I write that down, you just thought of a workaround to solve something, put that on a list of
Yep.
just ideas, and those 10 become the 5, become the video. So I've been really good at identifying when, I come up with a solution for something that's slightly, askew or anything else. And granted, that's specifically for like tech tutorials. There's a separate conversation for like, broader ideas or soft skills and all that. But at least if you're just trying to blog down cool stuff to like poke around in with the software that you're doing, just write them all down. Have a running list. Have a little thing on your known where the reminders app or something where you just quickly jot them down or do a dictate. But just take moments out of your day to put them in, and eventually it starts flowing a lot quicker and you can come up with ideas like a lot more readily. But I feel like that helps prevent writer's block, because you never have to just go from a blank slate. You always have this large running list of random ideas that could turn into that. Because you're not, 'cause I would find a lot of people struggle from just, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to think
Yeah.
about cool things that I could do. Like that's so much harder than writing them down organically.
Yeah, and if you ever like give a presentation or even attend a presentation, like people will have questions during the talk, and those all can be a
Yeah.
blog post or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that idea is good in general, because when I make a presentation, a lot of times the advice I'll do speaker mentoring to people, and the advice I give is write for yourself from 2 years ago as the audience, because
Yeah.
you are very intimately familiar with that particular audience member and you know exactly what would have helped them, and so it makes for some of the best talks. So definitely the same thing with like maybe you from a month ago where you're like, I knew about this feature. I wish I knew how to have solved this kind of thing for sure.
Just speaking of like presenting and getting ideas from that, I will like if somebody says something from the audience that like turns into, oh my god, that would be a great video, I will just straight up just, because I have Notepad minimized and I'll like, give me one sec, okay, cool,
Yeah.
and I will do it in the middle of a talk or a training, just because like I'm going to forget this otherwise. That's a really cool idea. Thank you. Let me write this down. I used to get embarrassed and thinking, oh, that's unprofessional. Like, no, it probably makes somebody feel good that they just helped give you like a cool idea for something, and it takes
Right.
5 or 10 seconds to jot a note down. Just have Notepad open and minimized on your desktop or something. Let's see. Anything else to sum up? So, talk broadly about consulting. From all the topics related to kind of the heat levels and quality of leads to scope creep and explorations. Outside of the course, is there any other follow-ups that you'd recommend as a place to start with any remaining links or anything else that I can share for people to go check out in addition to
Yeah.
watching this of the course?
Yeah, most definitely. So there's the podcast, it's finished, I guess you would call it, but there's a podcast called The Business of Authority. And that was really, really helpful to me to start thinking about all the different aspects of consulting, but especially value pricing and all that kind of stuff. Because one of the co-hosts was Jonathan Stark, who has his own podcast called Ditching Hourly. But just trying to think more about moving up that sort of quality ladder, thinking about the customer. And then a book related to that is Story Brand. It's the best plain English book on marketing that I've ever read, and it really helps you get better at putting the customer at the center and helping them be the Luke Skywalker and you're the Obi-Wan Kenobi instead of we're all little narcissists sometimes and we want to make ourselves look cool. And so those are both really, really good resources.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think if
And
you
yep,
read that book for marketing, you binge that podcast, you'll be in a very good spot, in my opinion.
just drop them into the chat as well too. So perfect.
Nice, I see that. Yeah, you work quick.
Yeah. Done. This is like the 170th, 180th live stream that I've done at this point. It's been a few.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
that's honestly pretty cool. I think the other thing I on my channel, I have some of the initial modules, and in the first one I talk about too is like, why do you want to do this? Because I think, I don't know, there's this weird societal thing of hustle culture and all that, where we feel like we have to monetize all of our hobbies, we have to monetize all of our spare time, and if you're just in this for the money, it's a weird there's a joke that consultants will work 100 hours to avoid working a 40-hour work week. And so I think it's important to reflect a little bit, like, if you are excited about like having some sort of capstone to your career, or you want to be able to be in control of your career, or you want the flexibility, I think those are all really good reasons to do this. If you already have the skill set and you can take advantage of it, I think that's a great reason. But if you're just trying to make more money, like, this is a really, really hard way to do that if you're starting from zero and you haven't like already
It's
worked for a consulting firm or something like that.
at the for the average individual, I'd say it's going to be about 4 or 5 years into consulting, unless you're doing it with somebody else. If you are completely 100% solo, it's going to take quite a few years for you to catch up, because you also got to think of stocks and other stuff. Most of us don't go to this because if you get high up at a place like Amazon, you can get into the high 6 figures and 7 figures. You can make a lot of money for some people, and unless you own a company that has like 15 or 20 employees, you're never going to make that much independently. But it's the freedom that you get with it to a degree. You own your own thing, you're your own brand. You choose your clients. You take a month off if you want to. Like I feel like a lot of people do it because they just like the autonomy. They like owning their own. But yes, you can make good money, but it's not going to be like an insane amount. So like, yeah, I guess you could if you chose to climb a corporate ladder. So like that's usually not the primary motivator for most of us. It's the degrees of freedom that comes in a lot of avenues from that.
Yeah, and that freedom, I think, when you start to think about, okay, maybe I need to go back to a regular job, it kind of surprises you what you get used to. Because if I want to go buy a new computer, I don't have to get any approval from anyone. If I want to take a vacation for a week, like, yeah, I need to plan it so that it doesn't interfere with customer projects, but otherwise I don't have to get approval for anyone. And if I want to spend time maybe presenting the user groups or getting involved in the community, like I can. And because I remember my last job, I was doing an online presentation for a user group I'd already scheduled, and some sort of issue came up at work, and it was really awkward. Like, well, I already committed to this. So yeah. Oh my God. Yes. 7 figures. Like,
I already know one person who does that, but I would say like generally these days for most software engineers at like Amazon and others with stock and everything, it's 200,000 to 400,000 in a lot of these places. Getting hired out of
yeah,
college now, like it's making $500,000 a year is not that unexpected anymore. Like we didn't get that when we were coming out of college initially. It was like 70 to 120,000 you get at an Amazon, but the new rates for salaried man or salaried person at companies is absolutely insane for like a 24-year-old coming out of college that's making some of this stuff.
yeah. I think part of what helps me with being solo is I live in the Rust Belt in Pennsylvania. And so everything's a lot cheaper here. I think I bought my house for like 110,000. And so I actually pay more for my health insurance than I do for my mortgage, which could be good or bad depending on how you think about it.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a down. There's a lot of, well, maybe not a lot in tech. Granted, my business expenses are fairly low. It's a few hundred a month probably on like subscriptions and SaaS products and a few things like that. But you don't have to buy retail space. But health insurance is not cheap. Like I paid $740 a month or something for mine for like the gold plan here in Washington State. Yeah,
we're like 900 for the two of us in our 30s.
I wish mine could be that half of that. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, right.
When you do get a discount if you buy for a family versus like one person at a time for sure.
Yep.
And our friends in the chat, they're over in Europe. They're laughing in universal healthcare.
Yeah, right. Well,
yep, exactly.
I mean, we've got the final laugh because U.S. rates are like 25 to 50% higher than in Europe. So
exactly,
there's some trade-offs there.
Any final comments or anything else as we sign off for the day?
Yeah, let me think for a second here. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that like this is all learnable, and so it's really easy to get starstruck and to think that people like me or consultants are these super special kind of people. And I think it requires a certain bit of personality, but you'd be surprised how much is stuff that you can learn. And the best way to learn is go work for a consulting firm. But a lot more of it is within reach than maybe you think. And there's a lot more work to it than maybe you think. So that's what I'd probably wrap up with.
And it's a good takeaway comment. I like that. If I actually did a lot of those, what are those YouTube like? It's not like a snippet, but where you can do little video grabs and you have like the video highlights or something from a stream. It would be a good one if I haven't put enough effort into that. Okay. Donna at least threw one question in before I officially sign off, so I'll at least answer this. Do I even still have my... yes, okay, I do still have the other window open. All right, one final one. So how many hours do you work a week on average? I used to work a lot more. So before I started to value my own time a bit more, and I think as the older I got, I appreciated my evenings more. But nowadays, 45 to 50, probably. Yeah. No, this isn't build, because again, like you want a base level of a build amount, and then you have everything else that just goes into running business. I'd say between 40 to 50 on average. And I try to aim for about 45 or so, but I work from home, and honestly, like working an extra hour or so in an evening, if you're getting paid for it, isn't that bad. But I try not to work past about 6 p.m. I'd say that's my biggest cutoff is no later than 6 to 6:30 in an evening.
Yeah, so the first year I blogged every 3 months about the whole self-employment thing. And I was keeping track of my time for a while, and it would literally from week to week vary from like 30 hours to 50 hours because I had no constraints in place. Now I'm pretty strict about, I start work at 9, I finish work at 6, and so theoretically I'm working 40 hours a week. But the output kind of varies. For me, I'm trying to pivot more into the training stuff, and so that's a lot harder to put a picture on. But you talk about the billable part. I think one thing didn't touch about, but I have like a section on mental health in the course and everything, is trying to explain this job to your family and your friends can be really rough, whether they think that you can
Yeah.
interrupt. Or I remember I was really like overworked one year, and I told my friends like, hey, like it's a little rough, I'm billing 30 hours a week right now. And my one friend's like, that's a normal work week. And then I had to explain like, no, I'm working like 50 or 60 and billing 30 and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, being able to explain that to people can be a little challenging, but you have to put in guardrails. Like my first year, my work laptop was also my personal laptop, and it was not good for my mental health.
Yeah, I mean, like my office is also technically my gaming area, but you know, I think if I have light work and I'm not working as many build and work isn't stressing me out, I do more PC gaming because I don't feel like locked in my office. But if
Yeah.
work's already killing me enough and I want to play some games, I find that I gravitate to my console in my living room more,
Yeah,
just because
having a
I get
separate
out of my
device
bubble.
that doesn't feel like work.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
exactly.
nice.
100%. Cool. But yeah, I'll let you get going. This has been fantastic.
Yeah,
As always, love to have you back on again for this. But yeah, great conversations, good content, and appreciate everything you shared today.
thanks, man. Really appreciate it. All right, see ya.
All right, everyone, have a great weekend.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.